Hello and good morning. Welcome to our third breakfast talk at 9 in the morning. We welcome today Lena Violetta Leitner, Andrea Palasti, and Elena Messner. This is our third talk in a row of three, which is part of a supporting program also of an exhibition in the Angewandte Innovation Lab with the title May I Introduce Alien? It's a virtual online exhibition. You're invited to visit. And thank you also for the IEL for hosting us for those talks and for the exhibition. And today we will talk very broadly about alienness and migration. And we will start our session with a brief introduction from our three talk members today. We will start with Andrea Palasti, who's a visual artist, media artist and photographer based in Novi Sad, which is in Serbia for the people who don't know. And she will talk about her project Emil B044, which she's also presenting on the website of May I Introduce Alien. And the roots of her projects kind of also began in Serbia and ended in Vienna. So yeah, welcome, hello.
Hello.
Very great to have you, and please.
Hello, yes. So maybe I just start a little bit by explaining my research processes. I work in the frame of documentary practice, and through photography or video, I'm approaching to the initial themes of cultural geography, history, or the everyday life. And in recent years, I'm blending my researches with educational strategies. So in a way, I'm focusing on case studies, on collaborating with other artists, journalists, curators, and now with the Emil project, I also collaborated with scientists. And this way, I try to explore some alternative narratives. I would maybe even say alternative narratives that didn't get inside our school system or some other stories that we didn't learn in the schools. So these are some kind of incidental school lessons. In the Emil project, I bumped into a story about orangutan the Emil. I would maybe share my screen now. Emil, who was an orangutan, a former pet of a Serbian civil servant, who sold him to the Schönbrunn Zoo because he had to transfer with his service and he couldn't live with him anymore. So I went into search of his story in a way to find what happened to him after his death, because he was one of the most popular zoo inhabitants in the Schönbrunn Zoo between the two world wars. Yes, maybe that would be enough for the beginning.
Thank you very much. You finished with your introduction? Okay, so I can go to Violetta. So now Lena Violetta Leitner will give us a brief introduction to her background, where she's coming from, what she's doing at the moment, and she will also give us some insights into her project, the IZMP, the Integration Center for Migrated Plants, which is also presenting at the May I Introduce Alien exhibition. Cool to have you.
Hello, please, Andrea, stop your screen sharing so I can enter our Zoom because because I also want to give you a glimpse into my work, into the marvelous world of plants. So hello, now you can see me. I'm very excited to be here. Thank you, Alexandra, for the nice introductions. And I'd like you to join me today in the language lab of IZMP, which you can see in the background. This photo was taken by Joanneum in Graz last year in November, where it was shown. And now just come on and join me into the lab. I'll give you a short tour inside. We'll share my screen now. So, let's start here.
Ich brauche die fertige Arbeit erst in 2 Tagen. Ich gebe Ihnen noch 2 Tage Zeit.
2.
Wir müssen uns beeilen. Es ist schon sehr spät. Es ist höchste Zeit.
3.
Das ist mir sehr wichtig. Dafür nehme ich mir viel Zeit.
4.
Was? Wir haben uns 2 Jahre lang nicht gesehen. Wie die Zeit vergeht.
So that was a tour at my language lab of the Integration Center of Migrated Plants. The video you have seen now, as it says, it's filmed by Birgit and Peter Kainz of Angewandte, because actually this language lab of IZMP was my finishing project, my diploma project at the Digital Art Department at Angewandte, which is already 3 years ago, now in summer semester 2017, but it kicked off and I'm still working on the project. This was really my starting point, my obsession for foreign migrated plants, labs and microscopic videos and science, natural science. So it was the first time I consulted and worked together with natural scientists. Of course, I also consulted anthropologists and sociologists, but the natural science was totally new for me. So I worked here with foreign plants and created this fictitious institution, which is researching foreign plants and their integration status here in Austria. And the methods it's using is supposed to be really scientific with microscopes, looking at adaptations of cell to sonifications. I use language as the main integration indicator. I was oriented by the Austrian Ministry and social studies about integration indicators, and it measures the resistance inside the leaves. So that's shortly said. And for the plants, maybe foreign here means on the one side, exotic garden center plants that you can buy, but also the invasive alien species plants, especially the Japanese knotweed that you have seen here. Those are plants that are new, but new since 1492 because they were brought directly or indirectly by human to other regions since 1492. And those alien species have a negative connotation because they spread, they cost a lot of money to get rid of them. So it's also an economical issue. And the plants were also brought because of economical issues a lot of the time. So you see how the perception of a plant can change through the time. And this language of the plants was also something that interests me in the project. And I find it sometimes shocking how much it correlates, how you talk about people and plants, and it can be used, and it is used a lot for political agendas. So I jump over to the recent project I did for May I Introduce Alien. I still really love the Integration Center and the world of science, but I wanted to go a little bit further in the interaction with the public, because the lab is sometimes a very strict room where people do not interact, except I am there present as the head of the department. Then they will talk with me. And I wanted to be a little bit more open in the form. So I created this kind of show in the Glass House, season 1, Only One Can Be Planted. This show will be online for 4 weeks on the website. Please go and visit and vote the plant you don't like out. Oops, sorry. So we have here the plants and you can decide which one you don't like. This is not working very well. So now, and you can choose one of those plants. The Japanese knotweed, for example, is my favorite plant. And you can click and kick them out and also decide how, if you throw them in the garbage, or you send them back home. So thank you. I think we will later talk a little bit more about it. That is all from me.
Okay, thank you, Violetta. Last but not least, we welcome Elena Messner, who's a writer, cultural theorist, and literary scientist. And we are very happy that you are here and that you are our humanities scientist in a way today, which is very special because the 2 days before we were very focused on natural scientists and the biologists. So welcome, and we're looking forward to your introduction.
Thank you very much also for the invitation to this talk and to the whole project. I had the pleasure already to talk with all the artists of the project, to discuss it, to prepare myself, and every time in the preparing interviews, I saw how much I can relate to what artists do as approach to their objects or to their art. And we also discussed the question why cultural studies and also the being a writer is maybe not even so far away from art. Especially I can very much relate to the project also from the point of view of content. When I was listening to Andrea, it was very near to how I work, but I don't want to say that the results are always the same. I think the questions are maybe similar. Sometimes the methods can be used in art and in cultural science, as we call it. I think the difference is that, of course, cultural science is an interpretation work. So this is what distances me from you. And I was also invited to this talk to present one project, which is called the Museum of Migration, which was specifically designed to transgress this frontier, these barriers, this border between art and science. So in this project, we tried to create a room similar maybe to what Violetta tried with her lab. We just wanted to take a room, to create it, to imitate something that exists, but to transform it completely. So we took something like a national museum idea, but we wanted to denationalize it, to deterritorialize it. And we also have this educational approach and documentary approach that Andrea was talking about, and this pushing something into the mainstream or into what we would call school stream maybe. And we wanted to push maybe the idea of presentations of objects in a migrational way, of thinking a museum through the eyes of migrational framing, opening borders, and thinking new concepts of museum also, but also to invite artists, science and activists, social workers, to all together build a museum. So not this idea of a classical curated room, but a collective and from different points of view of society. So this we made in Vienna, and yeah, I think that's enough for my introduction.
Thank you very much. So I will just connect the three of you, which is, I guess, quite obvious that you all touched the topic of migration in a way, but from very different viewpoints maybe, or in very different approaches. What do you think? Because those topics are very political. If you look at Violetta's topic, of course, it's very political, but in this kind of costume of the very scientific lab situation. Where do you have the feeling that, like, this is a question for the three of us, because I think the situatedness of all your experiments and performances is very interesting. Where do you have the feeling is the right or the best or the most successful space for your projects to be displaced and for to be placed, and for your projects to kind of be presented to the audience? Like, which audience would you like to reach, and where do you feel you can gain the most impact if this is what you want to achieve? Maybe start directly with Violetta.
Yes, Yeah, it's really a good question. I was thinking a lot in general about artworks, how you can reach different people. For me, the ideal places are really everywhere because you can reach different people. So I have been in museums like here in the Neue Galerie in Graz, which is like really the museum. So you have other people coming there. Then I have been part, thank you, Elena, also at the Museum of Migration, where there have been different projects, different approaches, other people coming. So I had other discussions there. And I also have been in conferences at university and at an academic atmosphere where there have been anthropologists talking really different about the topic. So, and I have been also in botanical gardens. Every time where I go, the people see something different in my work, they connect differently. And this is also very important, meaning they come maybe more from the sociological side, they see the humor, they're gonna talk more about people with me, about the human migration and things like that. Or they come more from botanic side. So they're gonna talk about this also very important topic of invasive plants and how you deal with it. And that is what I like. The important thing here, what I have seen is it needs me somehow. I need to be present to talk with the people. So what I need is this exchange like we do today, talking with people and getting feedback and discussing the work together. So I feel like I need to be present in the lab or present it somehow.
Andrea, how is it in your case? Because your project or how you presented Emil by now was very much in a quite straight gallery setting, like from what I remember, from what I saw. But at the same time, you say you're very much into educational practice. You're also a teacher. So how do you feel, where is the best place for your art to exist and to reach the audience you want to reach?
So yes, from one perspective, the place shows the context of a project. So I see Emil in galleries or museums. Maybe the least knowledge productive in a way that I feel that people who are coming to exhibitions and museums are just one part of the public, and this is the minority of it. So I, even in this case with Emil, sharing this historical narrative, I see it best in an educational setting where I implement this story in my lectures. So not only the Emil project, but all of my projects are also part of my lecture series at the Academy. So I think that is also one way of presenting and sharing knowledge. But my main interest in doing this project was mixing my documentation with institutional documentation. So when I first started to work on this theme, I looked inside the archive of the Schönbrunn Zoo. And I realized that they only have documents that speaks about Emil when he was alive. And when I started to research about his death and where his body parts are, I realized that the Natural History Museum, who holds his fur, only knows about his fur and nothing else. And also the zoological collection at the Department of Theoretical Biology at the University of Vienna, they have his hands, brains, and they also don't know the story about Emil and where the other parts are or who he was. So they have only their own folders about him. So I always love to say that the project is really not the exhibition, but my interference in their folders. So after my project was done, all the institutions got a a kit, a folder kit with everything inside. So Schönbrunn Zoo now have everything from the beginning of Emil's life until the end, where all the body parts are. So all the photographs and the documents, and also the Natural History Museum and the Zoological Collection now have the full story about him. So after me, if someone comes to research about it, they have the full story. So in a way, I always like to think of it that I help to widen their folders.
It almost feels as if you were a kind of other kind of scientist, like adding to the scientific knowledge there.
Yes,
filling up a gap or this connecting gap between the dots.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Elena, I find your project very interesting because you say it's very collective, built from many different people from many different backgrounds. How do you manage this? Like, how can we imagine does the process of this happen? Because I have the feeling that it's also very much about the process. It's a kind of a traveling concept also. It's not really located somewhere, not in space and not in people, I have the feeling, or of course everywhere and with everyone kind of. Do you have like, how is your experience? Do you have the feeling that there are better spaces where you can, where you are more successful to reach or to bring your message or to reach your audience than other spaces? Or how is this? Is it a testing field?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for our project, for this project, Museum of Migration, I think the key question was the space. So it is not just thinking about where can we or how can we, but really where can we show something, but really how can we create space which does not exist because this museum does not exist. So this was also the key activist and interventional point of what we did. And almost every project that we invited, every position that we invited had another approach to this question about why, where, and when to create a space which would maybe be not representative, but sensible to the question of migration. We are not talking about representational spaces like National Museum showing national history. This is representation. We are talking about different things to subvert this concept even of representation. So this was, there is no answer to this because this is the question that the museum puts to the audience also and to us. And I think that a lot of projects that I created are focusing around this question of space, in the sense of who can live where, who has the right to be where, who can show where, who has approach to which kind of spaces, who can enter public spaces, who cannot. And I think at the beginning of my project when I was younger, I was always completely in love with the public space. Everything had to be in the public. Don't go indoor, don't go to galleries, don't go to literary institutions, just do everything outside. And I think maybe it's because I'm older or because I really, I think that it is not only the public space in the sense of outdoor, the public space is also indoor, but it is also going into institutions, which became more the focus of my work, I think. And the most extreme that I did in this sense of going into institutions was my last project, which is a little bit related to the Museum of Migration. It was an initiative to change the Museum of National Army in Austria, because it was really a political initiative, but also with artists and scientists. We created also a situation, I would say, to put our critique very public. And I just tell this because I think the question of space is quite similar, like what Andrea told. There was a concrete room. We went to the Arsenal in Vienna. This was a military space for 100 years ago, directly in front of the museum that we criticized. So there was the museum, which is in a Kaserne, and we were in another military space where we created our exhibition and our whole day of talk with scientists about what is going wrong. And this was one local space really relating to the object, so on FAS, and to take the space, to really invade like the plans of Violetta, to really like this military, we're taking this now, it's ours, and we are making a new museum here. So this was the fictional fake, of course, but it was really concrete. And then the real space that we created was in the media, and it was in another kind of public space. It was in the online discussions, in the TV, in the radio, in debates that followed after. And so this was one of the greatest success for my project in this sense, political sense, to really create public space, public debate outside of you, to put it to the real public, not in indoor outdoor discussions, but really intellectual space. So this would be for me, for every kind of project and art, the ideal space, the debate space.
Mm-hmm. Actually, this is what I was also thinking in this talking with people, this exchange, the debate, it goes further on. And Andrea, I could also relate so much to what you said, is what I wanted to say too. I think this, what you said, the exhibition is one part, but then you talking about it, doing these lectures or with your students, this is, I totally agree with my project or most of the projects too. This discussion and the space in between the people is really important, because if not, it stays in the bubble, like the art bubble or the institutional bubble, and people are looking at it and just saying, ah, nice or ugly or whatever, and then it's over. But I think this is not what we want in our art. We want to go further.
I just want to come back to one point that just pick out some of the thoughts Elena mentioned. Because I want to connect somehow you two and you three a bit more. You talked about fiction, and you said fiction, and also like what I would be interested in is how you feel about the way that, for example, Violetta in her project shapes this narrative around migration. I think she's talking from all of our 5 projects in the exhibition, she's talking the most directly about migration in a way, even if it's through a very different lens. And how do you feel about this kind of storytelling, or this kind of looking at an issue through a very different lens, but maybe telling even more about it from your perspective as working in the field of migration from a very direct point of view, maybe really talking directly about the problem and the issue?
Mm-hmm. I really like this approach. So I'm I'm not objective in this sense because it relates to what I'm doing. I think that political work and artwork cannot hide. I will say it like this. They are not allowed to hide between aesthetics, pure aesthetics. They have to use aesthetics. And for me, this is my opinion, of course, I know that this is controversial, but for me, Violetta made exactly this. She created really with a lot of humor, and for me, a lot of, storytelling is a good word for me, because I can also relate from the literary science aspect, the telling of not a story in a banal way, but she created a whole societal space. She recreated society. She recreated with the key points of conflicts in our society, in European societies in general, and she created it with a really light, funny, provocative, a little bit and really straight to the point recreation. It is not as I said, I think the point of hiding behind your objects, behind your art is something that I would never call political art, even if you try to interpret something and you took some little thing out and then you say this is political. No, political is talking about space, talking about conflict, talking about irony of things also. And I think irony or maybe a little bit sarcasm are also very good points, even grotesque, because if you look at the provocation that she made, also reducing people to plants, but also showing or making an analogy between peoples and plants, which could be very provocative also. This for me, this works very good, and this is satire. If we could talk about fiction, satire for me is a very productive way to tell something, because there's also this question of, is it now only critique, or is it a critique with humor? Is it ironic? Satire is really very productive. So for me, this is a very brutal and also humorous project, and I liked it very much.
Thank you for the nice words.
And I just want to connect the word brutality straight to Andrea's project, which is kind of, because you talked about, I just pick up a few of your words, talked about reducing humans to plants. And in Andrea's Emil project, it's kind of, in a way, a little bit different, because Emil almost was humanized. So how do you feel about the story about Emil, and how and also how Andrea told it in a way which was kind of very descriptive, but we actually get the feedback from people nearly started to cry when they read about it, and the way also our experts, we had experts reflecting on it, which was actually Elena was part of it. So how do you feel about the story of Emil in the context of migration, also in this historic setting the whole story is set? Elena?
Okay. I saw a lot of my topics in Andrea's work also. So I just want to say this is what I see. I don't want to make any dominant interpretation about. I think we were talking, as I said, I had a long interview with Andrea also to get some information, but also just to get to know her. And there were so many little things that were striking, but the general project, I think it is also something that I can. How to put it? I don't want to repeat the words. I can relate to that touches me also. It was not this kind of touching that I thought, poor Emil. It was more like, society that you describe through this or connection of society and zoology at that time is not even so far away from what we experience today. So I also saw a lot of Gegenwart, a lot of presence present in your presentation, and I will repeat something that I also said for the podcast, because we were talking along, and it maybe goes back to the question of space. You, Andrea, you told me that you showed this in a gallery in Vienna, and you prepared the context, the written context. And you only touched the theme of Nazism and fascism in Austria at that time. And you wanted to put it in one sentence also in the description of your work, because maybe you can tell us more about this then. But the time we are talking about are the 30s. So it is the rising fascism in Austria and in Vienna and in Germany, and then it's the period of Nazism. And the director of the Schönbrunner Zoo at the time was a Nazi later in the Nazi period. And you just told me that the curators, if I remember well, maybe you correct me, that they were not so amused about you maybe putting this sentence about Nazism into your description. So I just want to say this is also what your art provokes, in the sense of it is maybe not even, it was not until now the key point of Emil. Emil is more about the question of misusing and also brutality of this animal, which, yeah, as you explained, also was humanized very much, so people could relate to him as sad man. And they gave him to eat and chocolate, and they killed him. And they put him in a zoo, of course. So this whole question of hierarchy between human and animal, this is very, very strong. But there are also those other points, the context, the political context of the time. So maybe, I don't know, this was for me, when we're really talking also about brutality and showing brutality in art, and showing violence and showing abuse and misabuse, and also this question of aggression of human against animal, and yeah, maybe you could comment on that.
Yeah, in a way, I played around with this kind of context, because my work is the video, and it's more like a children's story. It can be read as a children's story. I even thought that maybe we could make a illustrative book about his life in the zoo. But then if you start digging and searching for these hypertext or subtext, then a totally different narratives comes out. So yes, I wanted to acknowledge it, that his life, Emil's life, coincided with the period when the famous zoo director Otto Antonius was on head. But then again, I didn't went so deeply to research about his position during that time. Yes, he was a part of Nazi party, and lots of directors at that time, if they wanted to stay on position, they needed to be part of it. And even literature that I got from the zoo couldn't really specify his stand on this context. So I would say Otto Antonius was an internationally respected zoologist, and he was the first scientist ever to have been appointed as a director of the Schönbrunn Zoo. But on the other hand, yes, he has this biography saying that he was part of the Nazi member, and even at the end of the war, he killed himself and his wife in the zoo. So in a way, we can inscribe our our previous knowledge about the Nazis and that time. But and I think that was also the question for the organizers of the exhibition. Should we mention it just with one word? And how would I say, the fear what that word of can mean to other people. So I think that when we speak about this context, we sure need a lot more knowledge and history to know not the real story, but just to tackle a little bit about the yeah.
Okay, thank you. I will just grab up one thought that I think it was Elena who mentioned it before. You said that the humanities are not so far away from art, because especially I think what's special today is that we don't really have a biologist in our group. Yesterday and the day before, it was the whole discussion and debate was also when we talked about collaborations, was very much cycling around collaborations with natural scientists. And for me, I think this would be a great question for Violetta and also for Andrea. How did you like? How was your experience? Because Violetta, I know that you have a very good connection also to the humanities, and but equally to the natural sciences. What's your feeling? Who is the more alien compared to the artist? Do you also agree with Elena, who says the humanities are not so far away, and where is the, like, how do you see this connected to your experience from your project?
Oh, it's just a difficult question. Yeah, you might say that this project is connected to both the sciences, and I consulted people from both because it was really important to me. And the natural science, the biology for me was also totally new. I had not studied it, so I needed a little bit more consultation, looks into labs, talks with the scientists. And I have to say it always depends on the people. I had people in the humanities, in anthropology, who found it really shocking and problematic what I do, because they felt, oh, what do people say? It's connected, but actually I just show what is already done. People are talking about people and plants this way it is used. So I just show them the mirror, what is in the media, what you can find online, what you can find from certain parties. And the natural scientists were more focused on this, the biologists on this thing, how to portray invasive species much more, because this is also a tough problem in the biology. But everybody was really open. I have to say I had no experience that somebody just said no and denied. I think, and this is because I was in the context of the academy, of the university. I started it, my diploma project, so I had also the professor behind me, and this was something that helped me in the natural science, I would say. Going there, always had beforehand write a concept, a time management plan, and they needed to know, do you have someone assigned? Is there a professor who says it is okay what you're doing? And then it was fine. Of course, that was strange for them what I was doing, but everybody was open and tried to help me, and they gave me their honest feedback when they found something strange, and they wouldn't do it like that, but because it was this context of art and I had the university behind me, it was totally fine. I think if I hadn't come with this diploma, the professor and the Angewandte behind me, it might have been different, I have to say. And also we are really lucky at Angewandte. There are also these parts at the university that are more connected to natural science. We have the conservation and renovation and research lab there, where they have microscopes and the research on the materials. So I got a really great connection and could talk with them. And I mean, they do not work with plants there, so that was a material that was funny for them, but they were open because they're at the art university. So yeah, I hope that answers the question.
And how was the reaction from the audience? You told me some anecdotes about the people really, because it's such a fictional setting, and you really follow the whole story through in your performances. Also, you really present it as the real lab, and in a very convincing way. I also have to say how you present your scientific approaches and methods. Is there something like, how was the reaction from the audience? Do you remember reactions who are like, yes, that's a really good idea, or did people actually right away understand that it's a narrative about humans actually?
No, that depends on the people, and I have to say I'm lucky that I could show it in different places, as I was talking before, because there are different people coming, and because my project is really opening to this biology invasive species, which is very interesting, and then my point of view, my focus is more on the people, of course, but both are there and present. So sometimes people connect much more on the plants and this invasive species, especially when they come from the biology background. So it always depends who is coming, but I present myself quite neutral and try to use the methods I have learned in the labs. That was very important. This is why I spent quite some time. It was a longer, I think like 2 years it took me to get everything together, because I'm not from the biology, and also in anthropology and integration studies, I had to study a bit. That was important to me, that I know how the things look. That is really, that you get the connection. And for me, it's much more interesting when it's not just flat, everything there, but people see different things. And when you talk longer with them, sometimes then there's a switch, or they tell me different things. And yeah, for the realness, I had a lot of comments. People were thinking it is real, or it should be done, or like, why is this in the museum, is something I get a lot of time, or asking when I apply for subventions. They sometimes, even if I say this is the art project, blah, 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 they would say, oh, you're in the wrong place. Please, we apply as a scientific institute. So this is the best feedback for me. Yeah, I'm really happy about it. And then I like it when the people need a little bit of time and they think about it, and then later they come back and talk to me again. So it was really great. I mean, these talks are something I really enjoy, and what is important, the most important for me.
I think the point you mentioned about the interdisciplinarity, like because we had this yesterday and the day before, the topic of what's the easier way to realize a project. Is it from, we had scientists talking about, they sometimes had the feeling it was easier to collaborate with an artist and apply for art funding to follow more experimental scientific ideas. And of course, we like I can tell it from my point of view. From the cultural side, we always have the feeling in classic science, there's lots of resources, lots of funding, lots of 3 years projects. We were really funded through with people and stuff. So that was very interesting for me, and also that's why I wanted to connect this discussion we had yesterday to what you just said now, that it's kind of that people are kind of confused where to put your project and to put your approaches, which is very interesting, but also in a world of a specification where you kind of especially for funding and for applying in application processes, you really have to specify your aim, your goal, your audience. So to me, it would be the question: is this something you have the feeling you could use for your you could use in a beneficial way for yourself, or that is kind of a barrier also, that you kind of actually maybe don't want to position yourself in the one or the other field?
No, it's definitely a benefit, because I can be present in various contexts, and like Andrea mentioned, the context is everywhere, is everything. Like where you put the work, it speaks for the work, and like that I can touch different people and have different conversations about the topic. So this is important to me, and I benefit from it for sure.
Andrea, how do you feel about this? The question we had before, the humanities science and the natural science. How do you feel your connection to your project, which is closer or more alien to you and your practice? Because you actually nearly became a scientist during the process. Do you actually feel more connected, or do you have more relation or closer relation to the natural sciences, or do you feel you're more connected to the humanities?
Mm-hmm. I was always more connected to humanities, even in school. I was never good at natural science, biology, physics, mathematics. So I think that I even use this to get closer to something that I never was good at it. So in a way, I feel like I was a dilettante. Is it a word also in German? And I always thought that specifically in this project at the Department of the Theoretical Biology, that I was bothering them, that I came there and they had to work with me because a crazy artist want to tell a story about an orangutan. But in a way, I always felt bad that I'm using their time. But also they were really helpful and share their knowledge, and the idea of printing the Emil's head in a 3D was even their idea, because their practice is also based on printing 3D models of specimens. So yes, in a way, we really did collaborated, and they could see some of their methodology used by in a totally different context. So yes, I was really happy to have this privileged access to institutions and to sciences that I was never related to and that I never knew.
I just want to connect this your one thought in your last sentence to our very last question. We have 8 minutes left. I would say I like this question a lot. Andrea brought it up actually, and it's about because you talked about methodologies and methods of scientists, and maybe like in opposition to artist method. If you could start, like Elena, just start with you. If you could start from the beginning, or if you could start all over with your career, with your education, and what you do, what would you be, or who would you be rather, an artist or a scientist? The question is, like in your case, you say you feel very connected to art, so maybe the distinction is not so clear for you. But where do you have the feeling? What are you jealous about in the arts, maybe that where you feel you maybe have you don't have the freedom maybe in science, or the other way around? I don't want to make a suggestive question from this, but yeah, how do you feel about those two ways of approach?
I would change a lot when I could go back, but I think maybe the results would be the same, because in some way you develop your skills, as Andrea also said, and you come maybe to a similar result. And in the end, I'm not really an artist, I'm a writer. So this is, I would distinguish this from art, but being a cultural scientist and a writer are two genres of something which is really similar. And art, in the sense of more object-based art, is somehow a little bit different. So I'm not artist, but I was just thinking now when I was listening to you, Violetta and Andrea, that maybe it is easier for natural scientists who are far away from art, who really don't think, not cultural science, not art, not writing, we're really in a different system. And we have to say this is really a faraway system, that they can accept the surprise of something which is really different. And I think for cultural studies, sometimes working together with artists is even more complicated, because we work in the same field with different goals. And if the one tries to interpret the other, then there's concurrence, because artists don't even want to put an interpretation themselves, but they want to have very often like an open interpretation. And so maybe the anecdote with the anthropologist, who is not an art interpretative, it's not an interpretative approach, but still it's another kind of storytelling. It's another kind of historical look at the development of society and of human. So he has to give you his interpretation, yeah. But the natural scientist, he's not forced to do anything. He can just say, I like, I don't like. He's a real audience with open mind, let's say. But this is not that I want to say this is bad. I think this is good, because the conflict between the approach of the cultural studies and art, and it is good that there's conflict also, and that there's different really well argumented discussions with different goals and different approaches. So in this sense, I really think that my compromise, switching between the real, I would say, also very sociological approach that I have, because I made more literary sociology, not so much theory, but really a historical and sociological work about art. This was my this is where I'm an expert in. And then the writing, which is the creative part, which is also giving something. I would not call it freedom. It's just another approach. And sometimes they get in conflict because they have different goals. And of course, science at least has to pretend to give some answers, even if these answers are, we cannot really put it down to one interpretation. We have at least 10, we can look at the perception and the reception through hundreds of years who changed, but still we give these points, we give we put something down. And art can, of course, pretend to be completely open, which it is also not, because I really liked, again, the context question. Of course, it's not completely random. The context tells a lot. It's also a political context. It's a social context. And as Andrea said, the word Nazi in the description of her work would dominate. And if Violetta would put just one human beside the plant, it would completely change her. So it is context. And of course, imagine that Andrea would present Emil now in a Gestapo room. We would have a completely different context. Or if Violetta would present her plants in the Gestapo room. So yeah, I just want to say context is everything, but we can try to describe it in cultural science, and we can also leave it very open in discussions about art. And this is nice when you can experience both. So a little bit of this concurrence I can dissolve inside me.
Violetta, I just want to pass the question to you.
Yeah.
Maybe very briefly, this is already our wrap-up round, because we only have 2 minutes left, and I want to say a few words in the end. How do you feel about this, or what would you be jealous about in, for example, the natural scientists and their methods and their approaches? And yeah.
I mean, about the question, if I would do anything else, I can say no, I'm very happy with my choices. And as a kid, I always wanted to be a writer, actually, and a scientist. I was interested in researching nature, biology, environment. So I feel really blessed that as an artist, I can do kind of this creative part of writing and working with text in some kind of form or language, and researching the sciences and not be so restricted. I feel like the natural science is in that sense more restricted from the method, the form, the way. Of course, in art, we also have these bound restrictions, but I can move a little bit more, and I'm very happy about that I can have the chance to do both in my way and look into the words.
Andrea, how do you feel about this?
I would say to my younger self, learn more in the school, and to I would have loved to know more about natural sciences. Unfortunately, I didn't have the patience to learn everything and to love it from the first. But I hope that I still have the time to and the responsibility to learn it. So maybe I would not change my profession, but I would definitely love to learn more about it and to know more.
And you have the feeling in the field, in your field of art, that you and in your practice that you also have the freedom to do so. And yeah, how do you experience this?
Yes, I am, and I think that artists are really they need to learn different how do you say I forgot the word. So yeah, we have to be more wide and to learn from different perspectives and sciences. So I think this is the only way we can be really useful and change something. If we know more, we will do more.
Which is, I think, what's interesting is that this is a kind of a little bit opposing. It doesn't feel so in the first moment, but I always think about the quote: "For everything you learn, you also unlearn something." And I often have the feeling, the more I dig into methods into very scientific methods, that I maybe would lose something on the other hand, or on the other side, maybe lose some freedom or lose some. Yeah, I just wanted to connect this to what I interpreted from Elena's statements, also that this kind of conflict is also something that's very productive. And the conflict that maybe arises from the differences between the approaches. Yes, yeah, I just wanted to wrap it up in a way like this. Thank you very much for your participation. Also, a huge thank you to Elena, who really was a big part in the process of the exhibition. Also, like she was really engaged in trying to understand all of the projects. And yes, for everyone interested in also what Elena was talking about, on the website, the May I Introduce Alien exhibition website, we have a podcast format which is called The Opinion, and Elena is a part of this, and also the Integration Center for Migrated Plants and Emil are part of the whole exhibition. And yeah, we're looking forward for lots of audience participating also in our interactive parts. We invite people to share their thoughts, opinions, vote for migrated plants, to not chat with Emil, and other spectacular things. So thank you very much for the audience, and thanks a lot again to the Angewandte Innovation Lab, especially to Elisabeth Falkensteiner, who set up the whole talks with us, to Eva Weber for the whole social media, Nico Wind supporting us in the IEL, and Alexandra Graupner, who was supporting us from the very beginning. And yeah, we are very happy that we were part of this format and the Angewandte Festival. And we hope to see you on our virtual exhibition website. And thank you very much to the three of you for the conversation. And we hope to stay in touch and see each other soon, maybe also in person. Thank you very much and goodbye.
Ciao.
Thank you, Alexandra.